Okay, we're continuing this mimer. We're on the second chapter, VeHaeir Eineinu, Aves to Rabbi Nassan, Perek Lamed Aleph. In Aves, a Rabbi Nassan, which is similar to Perek Aves but longer, chapter 31. VeHaeir Baruch, it explains at length, that everything that God created in the world, He created something corresponding to that in man. So there's the macrocosm of the world, and there's the microcosm of man. So we're like a miniature world. And what comes out from this is that the entire world is like one giant body. And it talks about this in Mar Nevuchim, and there's also some other midrashim that talk about that. And in the flip side of that is that man is a microcosm, we're like a miniature world. So the world is like a big body, there's like a big person, and the person is like a small world. This is what it says, like from my flesh I could see God. In other words, why is it that from my flesh I could see God? I think the implication is that since we parallel the whole Seder Hishtalshelus, the whole creation, so therefore by looking at ourselves, we can also understand the world. The Ha'adam, from looking at my own body and my own soul, I'm able to come to see also godliness in the world. And this is one of the real fundamental principles in Torah and in Chassidus, that by working on ourselves and understanding, we have to find all the ideas we learn about in ourselves, and then we can really know it and experience it, and then we'll be able to also see how that same idea is outside in the world. But the problem is that the physical world covers over this truth, this godly truth. And this is similar to how our body covers over our soul. So we have a soul, and that's our main life. But the fact that we look at another person or even ourselves, and we see the body, we feel the body, and that can kind of distract us. Definitely in modern science, there's a big kind of materialist perspective where they like to reduce consciousness in the soul to just the physical brain and the chemical things that are going on there, and that covers over and hides the fact that there's actually something that's beyond that is just acting through the body. And especially the material of the world, looking at it from that perspective, really covers over the truth. So if we look at the world and we see it as this big organism, this living ecosystem, and so that's like a giant body, but we could still mistake the world for the main thing and not realize that there's actually something behind it at play. There's actually this godly force and desire and design behind it. So for example, in modern science, there's this perspective that yes, they're appreciating how the world is this complex ecosystem, everything is working together and is creating this fine balance between, let's say, predators and prey and all kinds of complicated things going on. But they like to look at it as just this evolutionary theory where there's just this kind of the system just has everything built into the physical system, and that's kind of just like, I would say that that's just looking at like the body level and not recognizing that there's this higher, more transcendent force that's guiding everything. And then you can even reduce it more than that to just the material, where you just look at it as just atoms that don't even have life. And there's this perspective to say, oh, maybe life isn't real, maybe consciousness isn't real, everything is just atoms. And that's really covering over the truth of the world by denying. This is like a very common thing where there's this idea of trying to like look at the world from this material point of view and say, so therefore we don't really have a consciousness, we don't really have free choice. But like, obviously that's not true, because you're consciously thinking about that. The fact that you could come up with that idea and think about that idea shows that you have consciousness, and it's something that's more than just a physical atom as we think of it. So yeah, there's definitely an element of sheker there that looking at just the material level can cover that up, cover up the truth of what's going on. V'hefresh bein gashmi l'chumrihu, the gashmihu choshech v'chumrihu afela. And the difference between, which we touched on before, between something that is physical and something that is material, is that something physical is just dark, but something that is chumri is afela. Afela means like a thick darkness, like there's a thick cloud or fog that's actually, so darkness is like if you're in a room without a light, it's just dark, but you turn the light on, there's nothing impeding the darkness. And as opposed to afela means that there's some sort of like thick cloud or something that's really impeding the darkness. I'm sorry, impeding the light. It's creating this extra level. And I think that corresponds to before the idea of helem and kisoi, that there's whether it's just the light is not shining or whether it's actually being covered. But let's take a look. Cheshech nikra dunkel. Cheshech means darkness. Das heißt al lichtige finsternis. This is it's a funny thing to say, but it's or maybe it's like a light darkness. It's a afel hu nikra finsternis, but Eifel means like a complete darkness. Maybe one is chayshech, maybe it's more like twilight. I'm not positive. I have to look up what the implication of that is. In Yonai benefeshu, and so what's this idea in our soul? There's two types of bad within ourselves. And ra, again, sometimes it means like evil or bad. Sometimes it just means like a perversion, some sort of thing that is destructive, way of looking at things, a destructive feeling or something like that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be with this kind of moral connotation of evil. Depends on the context, but it's definitely something that's destructive. Aleph, the first one is hu ra. So there's one case where a person knows that something is bad, they know something is wrong, they know something is dangerous. Like, I mean, how many people, they smoke, but they know it's bad for them, right? So it's one thing. Or somebody's eating a box of donuts, they know they shouldn't, but they do it anyway. There's some things that a person really desires very strongly. He desires them very much, and he Chaimdam means like to covet, to really crave. Misava is more to crave, and Chaimdam I think is more yet to covet, that they really view it as being very valuable and very special. But those are things that he sees as being forbidden according to Torah. So he knows he wants it, but he knows he's not supposed to. So in those situations, even though his yetzer, his inclination, is very overpowering, to influence him and to like seduce him to try to get him to do this thing. But he still has thoughts of Yerushalayim, I shouldn't do this, it's wrong, and things like that. I think a very classical case of that is Yosef with Potiphar's wife, where he had this strong desire, but he said it's a sin against God, and how can we do this? And so he eventually he rejected it in the end. Mishum zeh hu yochol la'amid al nafshay bedas u'bechira shelo yelech b'derech zu sheyuzak ba bevadai. And so, because he at least has this recognition that this is wrong, he has a sense of Yerushalayim, I realize that this is going to be bad for him, so therefore he's able to la'amid nafshay means to like gather the strength, to have the fortitude, and to choose not to go in this path that he knows is definitely going to be bad for him. So I'd love to do it, but I know this is going to be really bad for me and harmful, so I'm not going to do it. And this is what it says. Behold, I've placed before you life and good and death and bad. And again, I think the terms tov and ra here, they tend to be translated as good and bad with this kind of good and evil type of connotation, but it doesn't necessarily imply that. It could just be something, tov means something that's beneficial, and ra means something that's destructive and harmful. And so that fits very clearly into this pasuk, where there's life and there's things that are beneficial, which are things that are smaller things that add up to the quality of life or to one's health and goodness. That like they're not the entirety of being alive, but they're these little bits of being healthy and being strong and being in good spirits and all these kind of things, which add up to having a good, healthy, proper life. And the same thing, there's death, and then there's these smaller things that are destructive, that are like not a complete death, but they harm a person, damage them, weaken them in different ways. So hare raya be'enav, a person sees with his eyes, beis derachim lefonav, that there are these two paths before him. He sees that there's the good and there's the bad, and right, ve'oid zeis, and further, more than this, ve'oid zeis yeser, Not only does he recognize that he has a choice between these two paths, he recognizes the quality of each path. He recognizes this is a good path, this is life and good, this one is death and destruction. That the true good, he recognizes the true good for him which is really the spiritual good, and that is life. And so connecting to the spirit, connecting to the Ruchnius, that is where life lies. Hagashmi, and the physical good, these physical things of just something that is immediately pleasurable, but is not necessarily in line with the person's soul and their mission and their purpose and these kind of things. The taiva of chemda, where it's just a craving, and again, I think chemda implies to covet, but maybe there's a better word for it. I'll try to look that up too. So hu ra umavis. So that is destructive, and ultimately it is death, at least spiritually, and eventually it could lead to physical death, like you see. Unfortunately, a lot of rock stars and these kind of people, they live the life, but it's a very short life because it's a very unhealthy life. So physically, it can lead to death, all kinds of things like that. But definitely spiritually, the death is kind of immediate. That as soon as a person disconnects themselves from being a true human, their human spirit, and especially their godly soul, that's not, if they're living a life that's totally antithetical to that, totally opposes that, so then that type of life is immediately dead. And like you see, people feel dead inside when they feel that they're doing things that are totally wrong or totally against who they are, or just meaningless and empty. So that's the idea of like a spiritual destruction or spiritual death. Bays, and then so this is the first type of ra, the first type of evil or just perversion or destructive path. And the second one, hu ra kazeh. So this first one would be chaysh, would be darkness. The second one is going to be eifel, it's going to be even worse. The second one is such a type of bad, Ainu shehu b'maymeru matzav kazeh, meaning that a person comes to such a situation, that even if he knows that this is forbidden according to Torah, but it doesn't even occur to him, he doesn't stop and take pause and say, well, I shouldn't do this, this is forbidden, it's going to be bad, how could I do it? And he does what he wants, just following the whims of his heart. So this sense of, I'm free to do whatever I want and just leave me alone, that's this second level. And I think this corresponds in the Maamar Yafasha Achas, maybe I'll put a link to that too, to the difference between the midos, the negative midos, which correspond to the 7 nations, versus Amalek of Klippa, which is the source of the Klippa, the head of Klippa. This is what it says in Mishlei, Dalad Yotes, Perak Dalad, Pasuk Yotes, Derech Rishayim ka'afela loy yadu b'ma yikashelu. That the ways of the wicked is like this thick darkness, this cloudy darkness that they don't even know what they're stumbling on. And so this is a situation where the person doesn't even recognize that there's anything wrong, and they don't recognize that this is what's causing their problems, or that this could cause a problem. They're just totally it's not on their radar. Even if intellectually they know, but it's not something that they believe. It's not something that they really feel in any way. And actually the fact that it's in the feminine form, afela, implies that it's worse than just eifel. And I think this is connected to the idea that talked elsewhere about that in Ra, you have like the Zachar and the Nekeva, you have the masculine and feminine aspect of Ra, of evil, or Klippa, and the feminine aspect is in a way worse. That's where a person just opens themselves up to, they're just looking for, instead of looking to give something to the world, to create something, to accomplish something, which could maybe be perverted, where the person wants to accomplish something that's negative, or maybe they're doing it in a way that's not, they're looking for money or power and success, and they're, in order to do that, in order to achieve that, they're doing things that are against their values and things like that, or things that are destructive. But then there's where a person just feels that they're empty and they're just looking for pleasure, they're looking to just fill themselves. Talks about that elsewhere. I think the Maamar Isapo Novim Bavaya Simcha from the Mithra Rebbe talks about that. I think that's the implication, but let's see. So yeah, the Safel is even worse than Eifel. tiefe gedichte Finsternis, and this is called deep. I have to look up what gedichte means. Maybe tangible. I have to look up darkness. Let me look that up real quick. To reveal my secrets here. Well, my Yiddish isn't amazing, but Google Translate now actually has support for a lot of things, including Hebrew and Yiddish. It's not always perfect, but okay, yeah, dense. There we go. Thick. So deep, thick darkness. Hagam ha'aver mushchas sham. And so even the air itself, which means the air and like the environment, more generally speaking, is destructive. So you have a situation where a person is in, doing bad things, but then you also have a situation where the entire culture and environment becomes polluted and corrupted and becomes negative. VeHaeir Eineinu. In a house with a lot of light, the sunlight, I mean, both, first of all, having windows with where you can get fresh air is important, but also the light itself helps prevent certain types of bacteria and mold from growing and things like that. I think that's part of it, that the light itself keeps the air quality better. Bias afel, but in a dark house, she'ein VeHaeir, in a dark room or some sort of, place like that, the air also becomes bad. I guess it just grows mold and mildew, and it becomes very toxic for people. Nevertheless, the light of a candle can push away darkness. But so if you just have a dark room, it's good enough to bring in a candle, and the candle can push away darkness. But if you have something where it's like this quality of the air itself is bad, like if you go to a very deep cave where there isn't good oxygen there, like back when they used to do mining, I'm from Pittsburgh, so they used to do, a lot of coal mining, and they would bring candles or different types of things with them to detect there was dangerous gas there. I mean, they're worried more also about explosions, but sometimes there could also just be released gases that would ruin the quality of the air, and it wouldn't be able to breathe properly. But either way, yeah, if it's a bad quality of air, of al harayv deicha mechabe es haner. And in most of these cases, these kind of deep caves are not going to light a candle. It will push away and actually extinguish the candle. And just to give a little context, even though I'm sure he's going to get into this, but the idea of a candle, like it talks about elsewhere, there's different mishalim, the light of the sun, the light of a candle. So the light of a candle represents the human intellect, the fact that God gives man the ability to have reasoning and to see truth by his own understanding. So there's a certain level where our understanding and our hispainus can reach and can help us, see through and push away darkness. But once it creates this situation where the entire environment becomes corrupted and polluted, then it prevents the mind from thinking straight, and it destroys seichel itself. And I think you see that, unfortunately, happening a lot of sectors of today's world, where there's a complete corruption and pollution of the whole idea of just straight thinking and honesty, and it makes it impossible. There's not even a venue for approaching truth and for honest debate, and that because the whole environment becomes. And so in such a situation, you need a very strong, powerful torch, or some sort of very strong source of light, in order to lighten up that very thick darkness, very coarse darkness. By burning out, or somehow correcting that damaged air. V'hinei ksiv, for it's written in Tehillim, Dalet Aleph Vav. I think it's Midbar ba'oifi halech, Hetav yeshud soharoyim. I think that's what it is. That it's talking about that they were in a desert. Check. 2. Yeah, Googling things in Hebrew can be very useful. Okay, sorry. Oh yeah, midever ba'oifo yalich miketev shetzarayim. So there's this idea that there's a plague. So there's a time of a plague, and I guess in the time of a plague, there's air itself is polluted with viruses or whatever it is. And I just want to point out that I'm not pretending to be a guru or anything like that. This is the process. There's a lot of things I don't know. I look them up, and then that's the way it is. Okay, so this is pasuk vav. Okay, the plague that stalks in the darkness. Where's the there another? Let's take a look. Says maybe. Oh, that's interesting. He says that Dever and Ketev are the names of demons. One destroys at night and one destroys at noon. Okay, so that's very interesting. We were talking before about the idea of the mazikin, which fits that this is the idea of for people stumbling over these false beliefs, which are the idea of these demons, or these imaginations, or these philosophies or belief systems that are false, twisted, and perverted. Those are the idea of these demons, and there's one called Dever, which is something that affects at night. Then a person's walking in this thick darkness, and Miketev, this destruction, affects even when it's midday. I guess, is that worse, that it's even midday? Okay, so this is what it says. The midever ba'ifo yahalich Miketev shutzarayim. Ine dever hu rachman atzlam agefa haba min machla mistabekes. So Dever, a plague, is, God forbid, some sort of, so Dever, I guess, like pestilence or something like that. So this is a plague that comes from an illness that leaves. I'm not sure if mistabekes means that it stays with a person and it's hard for them to get healed from, to get better from, or if it means it's very contagious that it sticks to other people. And this is the type of illness, God forbid, is that it causes the person's limbs to become cold, one after the other, who makes until, God forbid, he dies. The ketev who rachmanatlan chayli ha machris. Ketev is, God forbid, an illness that cuts off. Aifen achayli rachmanatlan hu aide chamimus gedela hanikra bar brent. And so this is an illness that causes high fever. I'm not sure why that's called hamachris, but not sure what the implications are. Mistabekes, machris. Okay, I'll look into that. But anyway, so he's saying the dever is an illness that causes a person to become cold and lose feeling in their limbs and things like that. And as opposed to ketev cause this fever. Dever v'ketev hem beis klipes kashes. So Dever and Ketev represent two very severe klipes. Hashekafia mavur Benyomin, like we explained what their theme is. One is coldness and one is an unhealthy heat. Dever hu klipa dekar shizmana yeser b'layla. So Dever is a klipa, and here you see where Rashi hints at very deep. As Rashi explained this, in a very short way, but it's hinting at very deep secrets. Like it brings in Hayem that Rashi really has all the secrets of the Torah hidden in it. So Dever is this klippa of coldness, which is more at night. The bechol zman mizmane ashana heim becher v'heim bekayit, said all year, whether it's the winter, whether it's the summer, halayla hi kara yeser ma'ayim. The night is always colder than the day. And therefore, this illness of this unhealthy coldness is something that's connected to both the physical night and the spiritual night. And you see even today there are certain illnesses that are much worse at night, especially with children, croup and these kind of things. A lot of times are much worse at night. The ketev he klipa dechaim, and ketev is this kind of a fever shezmana yeser b'yom, which is worse during the day when it's hotter. In Yonam ba'avaydahu, and their idea in Avodas Hashem, the spiritual idea of these illnesses is The Yetzer Hara yesh beis mine derachim vayfanim eich lechasis es ha'adam l'hadiche midarchei haTorah v'hamitzvah. That the Yetzer Hara has two different ways, two different approaches how to seduce a person and to push him off of the path of Torah mitzvahs. So two strategies of the Yetzer Hara. And again, I think it's worth pointing out that the Rambam says that the Yetzer Hara is the imagination, and the Yetzer Tov is the intellect, is the seichel. And so this fits the idea that Chazal said a person is born with the Yetzer Hara, you only get the Yetzer Tov later. But it also says that, like the Rizal says, the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov both start up as two malachim, but the Yetzer Hara becomes corrupted and becomes a demon, but then it can be corrected and become a malach as well. And so the imagination is very prone to imagine all kinds of fantasies that if I'll have this and that, I'll be happy and it'll be so wonderful, which is not really true. And this lifestyle of glamour and with the stars and everything seems so alluring, but it's really a vain fantasy. It's really not true. It's not going to bring happiness. Riches and fame and all these things don't bring happiness. On the contrary, they can, if a person doesn't have good values and these core things, it can bring a lot of destruction. That's one type of imagination. The other type of thing is that it can bring a lot of fears, that a person imagines that this could happen and that can happen, and they're afraid of all kinds of things that they shouldn't be afraid of. And the intellect is able to help a person see the truth and see through it. And that's the idea of the Yetzer Tov. But eventually the imagination can be refined and actually can become more powerful in certain ways than the intellect. This is like you see that it's a good thing to remember and imagine certain types of things in a person. The Friedrich Rebbe talks about this. And you see that's one of the reasons why the Torah has stories and things like that, the Midrashim, they capture the imagination in a positive way. Emunah a lot of times can come into the imagination in a more way that's beyond what the intellect can grasp. Like it says, even a little child that's imagining when he's davening, he thinks of God as like this person, but because it's with the Emunah shining in there, it's more true than a person that's very sophisticated and has a very intellectual grasp of God, but he's limiting God to that understanding. He's not recognizing that it's really beyond that. So, you have this a positive side also. Nevuah comes specifically by the intellect refining the imagination, and that's what gives a person the ability of Nevuah. So that's just a little context for these ideas. Okay, so what are these two strategies that the Yetzer Hara has? The first is through this illness of dever, which he said is coldness. Hu lashin vidaber vidibor. I'm not sure if it's, let's see, is it midbar? Is it desert in speech? Or it can also be a leader. Also a daber can also mean a leader. I think it means a midbar here, a desert. The inyane bekriros, and this is the idea of coldness, of I guess being desolate. And this is the idea that the Yetzer Hara cools down for the person, makes the person insensitive, desensitizes him to the whole concept of Torah mitzvahs. And you see that there's been, culturally, this huge war against God and Torah mitzvahs and these kind of things. Ukashem shebegashmias inyan machla zu huma sherachman atzani varav. And just like physically, this illness is that the limbs, God forbid, one by one become cold and lose feeling and eventually die. There in Rahman Atzlan far kilt when upgish darben, that they become, God forbid, cold and then die. Until, God forbid, the entire body can be consumed like this. In a kamayikin hu beruchania, so too spiritually. Masha Yetzer Hara mekaras adam mitayra mitzvahs. That this is the way that the Yetzer Hara calls a person down from Torah mitzvahs. First, it starts with one thing and it grows and it grows. Mekare me'atzitzis, mekare me'atfilin, Shabbos, mikvah, v'kasher, adasher, isa l'meisam. So first, it cools the person down to tzitzis. It's not so important. It's just a hiddur mitzvah. You don't even have to wear them. It's only if you're wearing a four-corner garment, you have to put tzitzis, but you don't have to go out of your way to wear it. So it's just a hiddur. So it pulls them off to that, and then then tefillin, and then Shabbos, and everything, mikvah and kosher, until, God forbid, it totally spiritually destroys the person. It starts from the lightest things. The Gamish who ben Torah Mekaro Yilmed, even a person that is a Torah scholar, it says, you don't have to learn, you don't have to learn so much, you don't have to learn so deep, whatever it is, it finds always some way to start encroaching on the person. And then it says, okay, you learn, and then it says, okay, you don't have to go doing out of your way to do this and do that, just stay at home and rest or this or whatever. And then once the person becomes desensitized to learning and then to doing positive things and going out of their way to grow, then it starts saying, maybe you can transgress a little bit, break the rules a little bit. And the whole goal of the Yetzer Hara is to make the person into this desolate desert. So I guess it was, midbar, a desert. Desolate desert where you can't even grow any sort of fruit. The idea of fruits are Torah mitzvahs. So it makes the person devoid of having the possibility of being fertile for Torah mitzvahs. A pre-taiv. This word taiv continues. So any good fruit are macht im pust. It makes him empty. Leidik Rahman Atzlan im ice mikal davar taiv, and it empties him, God forbid, of everything good. And fills him on b'chol dvar meraim, and fills him up with all sorts of bad things. May b'divrei litzanus v'hadayman. So I guess the other word was dibur, was speech, that it fills him up with just words that are empty, destructive words, like litzanus, which is just mocking things and joking around. And basically, you see that like comedy can be a good thing. Humor can be a very good thing. It says that the Gemara tells a story about somebody that was Eliyahu Navi brought him to see. He said, "You want to know who are the Ben Olam Haba?" And he said, "Is it the people in the base measure?" He said, "No." He brought him out to the market where there were these people that used to tell jokes to people to cheer them up. He says they were the Bnei Olam Haba. So definitely humor can be a very positive thing, but it can also be a very corrosive thing. That there's definitely humor is very often used to be irreverent and to break down social norms and to desensitize people. So that's, whether it's intentional or not, that's one thing. But also just creates the attitude of Leitzanes is just an attitude of mocking and irreverence, which is the opposite of Kabbalah Soul, which Kabbalah Soul is the idea of having a feeling of a sense of duty. Is a yoke. So putting a yoke on someone, like if you have an animal, an ox has a lot of strength, a lot of power, but if it doesn't have a yoke, it's not going to be harnessed. If you put a yoke on it, then all that power and energy is harnessed to accomplish something. So the idea of Kabbalah Soul is feeling the sense of responsibility, of duty, to be productive, to help the world, to help other people around us, and things like that. And Leitzanis is the opposite of that. It's just joking around and nothing really matters, not feeling weight or importance to anything, not feeling a sense of responsibility. That first it fattens the person with many dvarim b'telim, and like it talks about a lot in Derech Chaim, how dvarim b'telim, this kind of idle chatter and just speaking, that trains a person to have a lack of a sense of weight and soul. And then it brings him to forbidden words, and eventually this again leads this sort of irreverence that cools him down to every sort of thing in Torah mitzvahs. And like Rambam describes this in Mishnah Torah about how first they just joke around about whatever, but then they start talking irreverently about about authority and God and Torah and mitzvahs, and it just becomes just breaks down everything. So that's why it's one of the things that removes a person from everything. And so that the second strategy, Yetzer Hara, that the Yetzer Hara uses, Malhiv es lev ha'adam b'chol davar taiva v'chemda menyani olam hazeh. Second strategy is that it excites the heart of fires up the heart of the person to every sort of craving and pleasure that's in this physical world. Der Yetzer Hara zu flackert dem Menschen mit dem Hatziyurim hanachmadim legufay. Skip. Mit kol hatziyurim hanachmadim legufay. So the Yetzer Hara, it fattens the person with all these images of everything that is desirable and pleasurable for the body. And again, this is the idea of like envisioning all of these fantasies of, oh, if I'd have this, if I'd have that, wow, imagine, and they get excited about whether it's food, whether it's wealth, whether it's fame, whether it's all kinds of things. Bechol hishtadlusai shel yetzer hara machen dem Menschen zu losene hearts, and all of the efforts of the yetzer hara are all in order to make the person to have an empty heart, and then to wake him up to be excited about all sorts of bad things. So it's like a sor me'ra and ase taiv, but here it's sor me'taiv ase ra kind of thing. First to pull him away, desensitize him to holiness, and then once you have that vacuum, to fill up that vacuum with this negativity. And I think this is the idea that he was hinting at before about afela. Maybe he's going to talk about it, that afela in the feminine is this idea of, filling it up. So first, the desensitization is the first step, but then the worst thing is once the person's just empty and they're ready to be filled with any sort of taiva. And this is all accomplished through prikasol, again, through having that lack of a sense of responsibility and duty, that a person doesn't feel they have a mission and a purpose and a duty to accomplish that. And therefore there is nothing holding them back to just doing whatever he feels like. The opposite of that, if a soldier, if he has to stay at his post, it can be very uncomfortable and very hard, but he knows that he has this duty, and they'll sit there and they'll be, in cold water and I don't know, very uncomfortable, but that's what they gotta do. And through this, God forbid, it destroys the person or cuts him off from godliness. I mean, the simple meaning of machris is just to destroy, but it could be he's implying like kares, totally cutting, detaching the person from their godly self. Midbar ba'ifrei halech, midever ba'ifrei halech, and this is the idea that from dever, which you said is this coldness, that caused the person to walk in darkness, in this thick darkness, this fog. The haschala is eifel, the beginning is eifel, this darkness, this thick darkness. Vases is finster, which is dark. Tyra is aron chayas. Tyra is light and is life. When as esfeltem ar hatyra is finster. Once a person is lacking that light of the Tyra, that's darkness. So darkness means that a person is just not engaged in Tyra. Either they're not learning Tyra, or they're not learning it in a way that they're really engaged and really seeing the light and the chayas in it. So a person could do it, like we said, to be yetza, just to fulfill their obligation. But on their level, we need to be to really understand it and really find the relevance of it, so something that shines that we can really see. By the VeHaeir Eineinu beHaeir ara Tyra. And so, through having a lot of darkness, God forbid, but by this lack, having a big void of this light of the Torah, so then this illness is able to attach to a person, God forbid, where there's this coldness that creeps up on the person in their fulfillment of the mitzvahs, and it gets worse and worse from day to day, God forbid. The ketev and this fever disease, akrisa chamanoslan yashud gam b'tzarayim. This is able to trip up a person even in middle of the day. To taikef arvagile. So once a person has this ketev, then even where there's this, everything is very revealed, right in the middle of the day, they stumble. V'hainu degam bazeshu. Even in areas where it's clear as day that the person is not going to deny that it's wrong. In a yashud migaido haprikasol, he's going to stumble because of this great lack of prikasol, this great lack of a feeling of any sort of duty or responsibility, that it doesn't matter what he does, and so therefore, who cares? And again, unfortunately, this is something that's very becoming very strong in our culture today, where there are things that are clearly immoral, but people don't care. I mean, there's a certain segment of the population that's been pushing this and creating this environment where you can do what you want. And it's interesting because I think with COVID, it definitely created this sense of recognition that what we do does matter, that one person's actions can affect the whole world, even on a very physical level and certainly spiritually. And so, but yeah, the first, as if we're not constantly with ourselves and with the world spreading light, then automatically it leads to darkness, which leads to all these kind of problems. So we have to be actively spreading light and spreading truth, and for ourselves and the people around us. And otherwise, the nature of things that this kind of rot and disease is going to creep in. Ad ki rechmon ye omru lakel sor mimenu v'das derachav lo yichafetzu. Until, God forbid, they say that to God we turn away and we don't desire to know his ways. This is also based paraphrase of what it says in Eiv. Okay. And this is what we said before. We quoted before that the ways of the wicked is like this thick darkness, which this thick darkness with in the feminine form, that's the Eimikra, the depth of bad, which again is this idea of just feeling this total void and emptiness and just looking to fill it with anything because a person doesn't feel that they have that meaning and purpose from Torah, and therefore they become this vacuum just looking for something to fill that void. In this which case the evil, the bad, or the destruction totally surrounds the person from every single side. He doesn't sense it or feel it at all. He has no awareness that it's even a problem. There is a zay film shuka in dem rach manatlan as filtas garnet. It becomes so sunken into the ra that he doesn't even recognize, doesn't even feel it. Becomes totally desensitized to it. Again, it becomes the whole just the environment itself. That's the idea. The environment itself becomes bad. VeHaeir Eineinu base kibulara, and this is the idea. So here he's alluding to this idea that it's the feminine, that he becomes a receptacle for ra, shehu kasha meher ra atzmai, which in a way is worse than the ra itself. And I think in a certain way, this is maybe it's not quite the same, but you know, when we're not actively turned on to godliness, not actively feeling the sense of duty to do what's right, then you have a situation where people can be, you know, told, let's say by their leaders, like in, you know, World War II or whatever, or any of these situations, always been happening throughout history, and it's happening now too, that there's, you know, where people are just told to do something and they just follow orders, and it's a bad thing, but they'll just do it. So in a certain way, that's it's worse because they don't have any sense of self, what's right to, you know, to do things, as opposed to, you know, a leader that they're being active and they're doing something destructive, but they at least have the sense of you know, that they stand for something, even if it's something evil. But when a person becomes totally empty and they don't have any sense of internal moral compass and what's right and wrong, that's a very, very dangerous thing. That they're just a product of their environment, and whatever is going on around them, they'll just go along with it and suck it up, and they're just looking to be part of something, looking to, you know, to get power, looking to, you know, whatever it is. Because Ra itself is a creation, and it's supposed to be what it's supposed to be. In other words, there's certain things that God creates in the world that are supposed to be destructive, whether it's physical things, or certain things that are poisonous, or certain things that are, you know, whatever, destructive in other ways. And also within ourselves, we're supposed to have this, you know, this ability that we have to fight against, to make mistakes and to imagine things that are false and all this kind of stuff. That's the way God created us. And the truth is that the reason that God created Ra is just to test us, that this world is like a tutorial. We're supposed to be learning and growing, and it's like a puzzle, you know, that you have a challenge, and a good puzzle is designed where your initial intuition is going to be wrong, and you have to look a little deeper. And that's the way God makes ourselves and the world, is that our initial first way of looking at things, that what we're just going to imagine with our initial intuition, is going to be wrong. We have to look a little deeper and do some explaining us to understand ourselves, to understand others, to understand the world, and to peel away, like the Rebbe describes, to peel away these masks. I think, which is a very good way to think about, like the klippa, you know, that there's these masks covering over the truth. And to get great reward, there's a great benefit from overcoming these challenges. And this is, you see that it's integral part of human nature that we enjoy a challenge. That's why we play games. Why do we play basketball or football or play puzzles or, you know, chess or any of these kind of things? We enjoy that idea that there's a challenge, and initially it's hard, but then we can overcome that. And also spiritually, we have this idea of, you know, morally and ethically and spiritually overcoming these challenges and accomplishing something meaningful through effort. As it talks about in Tanya, chapter 12, about the Benyomin, that the nature, that God created us, that our mind rules over the heart. And this is not just talking about willpower. Willpower is, you know, maybe it's one aspect of it, but a lot, really, that's the rutzin, the power of the desire can control things. But the idea of Mayach Shal Alev is that when you understand something, once you recognize the truth, it's naturally going to change how you feel about it. So you have a Russia basically has an incorrect understanding of the world, and therefore that leads them to, or even if it's not just understanding, but their das maybe also the way that if they understand it intellectually, they don't really feel that it's relevant to them. But either way, a Beinoni is like someone that understands enough to, let's say, like trust the doctor. The doctor tells you have to do this to be healthy, and this is bad for you. They don't understand it themselves. They don't really see it, but they believe it's true. They understand enough to know and to do it. And a tzaddik is basically where somebody's understanding is clear enough that they see it. It's clear as day, and they've experienced it. And they couldn't bring themselves to do something bad because they see that it would be terrible. Like, how, if you know something's poison, how could you take it, right? So it's just it's natural that once you have that real understanding. So again, if you just imagine, if somebody describes you this is bad, and you imagine it, it's not necessarily going to have that impact. But if you actually do the work to understand it and really see it and see how you experience that in your life, it's going to naturally change how you feel about it. Shekach neitzer ha'adam b'toldasei shekol adam yachol b'rtzaynei shebemeichei l'sapik v'limshal baruch taivasei shebelibei. That every single person. So here, maybe he is talking more about the. I'm not sure. Maybe he is talking about even just having self-control, because he says the desire that's in the mind, quoting from Tanya. But anyway, that a person through this power in their mind, they're able to wrestle with and control their taiva that's in their heart. The teva, and I guess there's a difference between a skafi and a hapcha, whether it's just pushing it away because you know what's right, which is it talks about elsewhere that the skafi is basically where you know enough to intellectually recognize that this is good for you and this is bad for you, but it's not something that you really see and experience yourself, and so that's called a skafi, and that's what he's talking about here with the Beinoni. Then there's the level where you really fully understand it, which is like a tzaddik, which is hapcha. The teva zuhu b'chol adam, and this nature is in something that's in every single person. Ela liyasei chumri hanu shenishka ben yanam gashim. But like we said, if a person makes himself materialistic by sinking into himself into physical things, mutva ben yani aguf, and becoming sunk into the ideas of the body, or becoming very habituated. I mean, mutva it means both. It means to sink in and to be a habit. They're related. But he becomes entrenched in these bodily things. Then he sits, God forbid, in this thick darkness. Like we said before, and like we said, afela is a state where the air itself, environment itself, becomes corrupted to the point that it actually will push away the light. And to fix and push away this darkness of afela, that requires a very large torch, some sort of bigger fire than just a regular candle. And that's the end of Beis Beis, chapter 2.